Hello, this is Dr. Esmacher, and today we're going to be doing an installment I like to call What's the Deal With, in which we look at stuff that you may think you know about, but probably don't know all the details too. So today we're going to take a look at Christopher Columbus. Now, why do we study Christopher Columbus? Well, particularly people kept asking this question in the summer of 2020 because in the wake of the death of George Floyd, an examination of the state of race in the United States and systemic racism, many people started looking at statues celebrating the Confederacy and wanting to tear them down. And we also saw people worldwide protesting systemic racism, wanting to tear down statues of Christopher Columbus. And a whole lot of people said, well, why? Why are people, defacing the statue of Christopher Columbus? Why are they demanding it be brought down? Why are they calling him a perpetuator of genocide? Isn't Christopher Columbus the dude who discovered the Americas? We all probably are familiar with this rhyme if you went to grade school in the United States. So in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. There's a lot more to the story of Columbus that will make you fully understand why people see celebrating him in statues and in other places as problematic. So let's take a look at Christopher Columbus, the historical figure, and understand why people are so mad at him and why we continue to study him if indeed he's associated with a lot of awful things in world history. So, some background on Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy. So, his Italian name was Cristoforo Colombo. And he grew up in a family that was not necessarily nautical, but he began sailing by his own accounts as a teenager and became an apprentice to a trader. And so he gained a lot of ocean going experience that way. And Christopher Columbus was largely a self taught man. He could read, he taught himself multiple different languages. He read very extensively, especially around the idea of biblical prophecy, because he thought that that was really interesting as a devout Catholic man. And so, this is one way to say that the common notion of Christopher Columbus thinking that the world was flat is a false one. Columbus was a pretty educated dude, again, mostly self taught, but he took the time to learn, including about geography and cartography. And so Columbus, contrary to the popular myth, did not believe that the earth was flat. Instead, he saw opportunity in the rivalry that was going on between Spain and Portugal at the time. So in the late 1400s, Portugal has taken the lead in oceanic exploration. They're Spain's smaller neighbor. They're hemmed in on three sides by Spain, and then on their western border, the Atlantic Ocean. And so Portugal had a long history of seafaring. They had discovered a series of islands off the coast of Africa that both Portugal and Spain had colonized. And it's going to be a Portuguese sailor, Vasco da Gama, who becomes the first European to circumnavigate Africa and find an ocean going route to Asia. And the reason that all of these European nations wanted an ocean connection with Asia is to get luxury trade products at cheaper prices by cutting out various middlemen if their luxury products like silk or spices or porcelain were traveling overland via the Silk Road. So Spain sees Portugal excelling. And in 1492, the rulers of Spain, which at this time is still a fairly new nation, brought about by the marriage of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of the rival nations of Castile and Aragon, they need a new hobby in 1492 because they have finally finished the process called Reconquista, or pushing Muslims out of Spain by finally defeating the last remaining Muslim kingdom of Grenada. So when Christopher Columbus comes to the court of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella after the Portuguese kind of kicking him out when he first tried his idea with them, they were willing to listen, even if his ideas sound entirely crazy. So for Christopher Columbus, He wanted to sail west to get to Asia. Now, everyone thought that this was a little weird, but he made the argument that people sailing around the coast of Africa were doing it the hard way, and that by his mathematical calculations, it should only be 2,760 miles west to get to Japan. Well, Columbus is not very good at math because the actual distance is about 12,000 miles, and unbeknownst to Columbus, there were a couple of continents in the way. Nevertheless, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella go, what is there to lose? We'll just give him 3 small ships. If we never see him again, great. If we do, if he finds something, great. Minimal investment on this risky project. So in 1492, Columbus sets sail from Spain, and he stops to supply in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa before sailing west. In October of 1492, Columbus lands at what is today San Salvador in the Bahamas, and he becomes convinced that he has found Asia. If you were ever wondering why the Caribbean is also sometimes nicknamed the West Indies, it's because Columbus thought he'd reached India. This is also why Native Americans are nicknamed Indians, because Columbus thought, again, that he was in Asia. He thought he must surely be somewhere close to China or Japan. And his first voyage in 1492 also visited what is today Cuba. So Columbus, in this voyage, looks for spices, doesn't find any, looks for precious metals, really doesn't find a whole lot, and he decides to sail back and report his findings that he has found Asia to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. On his second follow-up voyage, in which he will arrive with a much larger fleet and a couple thousand colonists, he settles in what is today Hispaniola, the island that contains Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Now, when we look at Columbus's thoughts about his discovery, which he didn't realize was a discovery, he in fact died never realizing he had not found Asia. We can look at his own writings because Columbus kept a journal of the voyage. In fact, it was in this journal that he recorded that they had first attempted to communicate with the Native Americans, likely the Taino or Arawak, some groups that populated the Caribbean. They tried to communicate with these guys first via Arabic because that was the language of trade in Asia. So the first words spoken in encounters between Europeans and Native Americans during Columbus's voyages were actually in Arabic. So Columbus kept a journal, including his impressions on the Native Americans. So, in one such entry on October 14th, 1492, he described writing kind of in his journal with the mind to share it with King Ferdinand of Spain when he returned about his opinion of the Native Americans. He wrote, "These people are very simple as regards the use of arms, as your highnesses will see from the 7 that I caused to be taken, to bring home and learn our language in return. Unless your highnesses should order them all to be brought to Castile, or to be kept as captives on the same island. For with 50 men they can all be subjugated and made to do what is required of them." So Columbus is basically saying in this journal entry that he thinks that the Spanish, with very small forces, can conquer and subdue the native peoples of the Caribbean and enslave them. Wonderful guy already, right? So on his second voyage, once he brings back evidence, right? He brings these natives he's kidnapped back to Spain as evidence that he has indeed found land by sailing west. He goes back to the island of Hispaniola, and under Spanish law, he's installed as the governor of a burgeoning colony there. And the 7 years that Columbus was in charge of this colony on the island of Hispaniola did not go well. And this is really where Columbus's reputation as a rapist and a murderer and a genocidal maniac comes from. Columbus and his brothers, who joined him on this second voyage, institute the encomienda system, which was meant to represent feudal systems of labor in Europe. The idea was that workers were supposed to work for the protection of their overlords who owned the land. In reality, the encomienda system in the Americas devolves into outright slavery, with many natives captured and forced into service, or captured and sold into slavery in Spain and elsewhere. At this time, Columbus enforces order with an iron fist, both against the native population as well as the Spanish colonists who had arrived to settle this small colony. He punishes minor infractions with things like dismemberment, chopping off limbs or noses. He also has a habit of, when he kills people for larger offenses, killing them in interesting ways. For example, in groups of 13, which he thought was significant because it reminded him of Jesus and his 12 apostles. As I mentioned, Columbus is an interesting religious man. So during Columbus's rule, things get out of control very quickly. There's lots of death and destruction of the native population. Bartolome de las Casas, who initially participates in this encomienda system as a Spanish colonist before finding religion and becoming a priest, later wrote his account of the Indies about the destruction and the damage that Columbus's rule as governor of Hispaniola caused. And you actually have Bartolome de las Casas in chapter 1 of Give Me Liberty, an excerpt from his book. So Columbus and his mismanagement of the colony, allowing his soldiers to run rampant and killing the population of Native Americans, eventually finds its way back to Spain. On his third voyage, this is when he requests some additional assistance from Spain in his governorship. They send an inspector, and he realizes just how bad it's gotten. And in fact, in 2006, a document was discovered in Spain, which was a report containing eyewitness testimony investigating the mismanagement of Columbus as governor of Hispaniola, and outline kind of the allegations against Columbus, which were many. So Columbus was, in fact, with his brothers, arrested in 1500 and sent back to Spain. And the treatment of these natives by Columbus and the Spanish settlers is not unusual, unfortunately, in the story of Spanish colonization of the Americas. And in fact, this cruelty, as recounted by Bartolome de las Casas in his later book, contributes to what's known as the Black Legend of Spanish colonization, or other Europeans, despite being late to the party to settle the Americas, being aware of the horrors inflicted on the native people by their Spanish conquerors. Columbus, during his time as governor, and eventually on a fourth voyage, because he is inexplicably freed and pardoned by the King of Spain, though never given political power again, Columbus never finds the gold, silk, or spices that he sought, and again dies never realizing that he's discovered the Americas. So, you might be asking yourself, why don't we study this stuff about Columbus in grade school? I mean, I just learned he was the dude who discovered the Americas. I didn't know about his horrible time as governor of Hispaniola and killing all of these people and enslaving all of these people. Well, there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, there is this sense of needing to be sensitive in how we talk about difficult things like rape and murder and genocide. You want to talk about it in an age-appropriate way, but that doesn't mean you avoid it altogether. You just have to find an age-appropriate way to talk about these kinds of transgressions. The other thing is, as I mentioned, Columbus's misdeeds were not unusual in the scope of Spanish colonization of the Americas. Please see The Conquest of the Aztec and the Inca, two large empires that are rapidly overtaken by the Spanish due to a combination of disease and military conquest. Please see in our own region around El Paso, Juan de Oñate, who's a very controversial figure because he also engages in whole-scale massacre of the Pueblo people. So Columbus's actions are a drop in the bucket compared to other Spanish conquerors. And so that's probably another reason why his particular misdeeds don't really fall on the radar. The other reason why we probably overlook this about Columbus until you get to college is the fact that there is one very important and less controversial thing Columbus is responsible for, and that's the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is the name given to this process of continuous contact for the first time in thousands of years between the Americas, what constitutes the New World, and Europe, Africa, and Asia, what constitutes the Old World. So this process of contact triggers this exchange of people, obviously, of animals, of plants, and of diseases. The Europeans bring over cash crops like sugarcane, which they can't grow really well in their native Europe, but is a desirable commodity because sugar is an addictive substance. We also see Europeans introducing to the Americas wheat, vines, horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, goats, and chickens. From the Americas, Europeans take back new foodstuffs to them, including potatoes, corn, tomato, tobacco, cacao. So, yes, no chocolate outside of the Americas before this. Squash, pumpkins, beans, peppers, peanuts, manioc, papayas, guavas, avocados, and pineapples. So there's lots of benefit going on here, but there's also lots of disaster, in particular disease. Native American peoples had no immunity to diseases brought over from the Old World. And so diseases that were relatively mild, if you caught it as a European and African or Asian, such as smallpox, measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, even the flu, were catastrophically deadly to Native Americans who very quickly became ill and died because of severe reactions to these diseases. For example, smallpox, which was introduced to the Aztecs in 1519 with the arrival of Hernan Cortez, reduced their population by 90%, 90, within a century of Spanish arrival. A North American population of Native Americans estimated somewhere between 2 to 5 million conservatively before European contact had dropped down to about 250,000 by the year 1900, and between 1500 and 1800 an estimated 100 million people died of European diseases in the Americas and the Pacific, with about 80 million of those people dying in the first 150 years alone. So when people talk about Columbus as someone who perpetuated genocide, they are both referring to this sort of unintended consequence of contact, this rapid and destructive spread of European disease, but they're also particularly referring to Columbus's stint as governor as well. So this process of the Columbian Exchange, where usually we focus on the benefits to the world in introducing new foodstuffs all across the world, is also catastrophically deadly for Native Americans. And this is the lasting legacy of Christopher Columbus. This is the legacy that more people are familiar with. This process that his discovery, in air quotes, because there were people there, of the Americas and the sustained contact that followed killed so many millions of people. And of course, Columbus himself directly involved in killing probably a couple thousand people as governor. So despite the fact that Columbus is problematic, we should study him in full. I mean, he is an example of the excesses of colonialism. And in fact, due to Bartolome de las Casas's book being published and translated into other languages, the tale of the Spanish in the Americas will serve as a cautionary tale to later European colonizers in the Americas, especially the French and the Dutch, who take it as a warning and as an example of what not to do when they get to the Americas. Until next time, I'm Dr. Esmacher.